for many South Africans, Madikizela-Mandela is a hero and a mother of the nation. To her critics, Madikizela-Mandela was a divisive figure and even a bully. But who was she to women across Africa? For some perspective, I'm joined in studio by Emira Woods of the International Working Group, African Rising for Justice, Peace and Dignity. Welcome.
An honor to be here with you, Vincent.
Yeah. Now, of course, I'm sure you have also been touched by the death of Winnie Mandela. Personally, to you, what did she mean?
Well, Mama Winnie was an icon. She was a bold, fearless, courageous woman leader. For me, she took up a mantle of many other dynamic African women leaders who fought against slavery, who fought against colonialism. Well, Mama Winnie, she was the courageous leader for many of us who stood up against white rule in South Africa, stood up against a machinery of violent repression that really tried to break a people. And she stood as an example of a powerful woman standing with dignity, fighting for justice, inspiring us all, not only in South Africa and across the continent, but really around the world.
Mm-hmm. So when you look across the continent of Africa, can you compare her with any other women, or did she inspire particular women on the continent that you can remember?
I think she continues to inspire, even now that she's passed. She's gone to join the ancestors, but she stands as an inspiration to leaders across the continent that are visioning a stronger, a better Africa, that are visioning an Africa where the resources of the continent feed the children of the continent, meet the needs of the people of the continent. I think she fought for those values, those principles enshrined in the ANC's Freedom Charter that spoke for resources actually being fairly distributed, in an economy that works for all. I think she spoke for many who fight for, particularly now in the age of climate catastrophe facing the entire continent, who fight for upholding some of our traditional practices to preserve the land, to preserve the vitality of the people. And so she continues to inspire.
We have lived at a time of the decades where people have been speaking about, the society should give women the opportunities to lead. They should actually create opportunities for women. But Winnie Mandela was operating under the most difficult circumstances, and her husband was in prison. She was herself being brutalized every day, yet she stood up and fought against the system. What do you think are the lessons the other women or women across Africa could pick out from Winnie Mandela?
I think it's important to remember that Winnie Mandela started out, even before she met and married Nelson Mandela, she was a thinker, but also a social worker, right? So she went to school in spite of all the horrors of apartheid. She fought for her education, and also she fought for children, right? She was a social worker that was interested in the dignity, the value, the lives of children at the community level. So, rooted in community and also integrally connected to movements. I think, understanding that Winnie Mandela was so a part of a people's movement led by young people throughout South Africa demanding an end to apartheid. So she was almost the voice of the movement for quite some time. And I think even till today stands as a model of how servant leadership should function, where people put the interests of their people first.
But at the same time, there are those who say she was less than perfect. She did a few things that did not endear her to some people in South Africa and even across the world.
Well, I think we have to remember the times, the horrors of apartheid, the violence that was wrought. Remember, this was a time when people were receiving packages with bombs in them, in their mailboxes, right? Where people had to be forced into exile for their own survival. So I think we have to remember how draconian the apartheid regime was and how ruthless it was in its determination to put down a people. And so I think what we see is a courageous woman who stood firm against white rule, who stood firm for the interests of her people, and who fought for those interests regardless of the machinery she was fighting against.
Do you think she's judged differently and sometimes a little bit more harshly because she was a woman as opposed to if it was a man in the same position?
Oh, I think we have to also say who's doing the judging. I think we have to look at some of the international media after her passing and see all of this kind of, retelling of history almost, right? And I think what you see, though, particularly from women across the continent and across the world, is an understanding that the bold, fearless, courageous leader of Winnie Mandela is an icon that we will hold up, and will continue to be inspired by for generations to come.
Well, I really appreciate your assessment of Winnie Mandela and sharing your perspectives with us.
Thank you.
That's Emira Woods is with the International Working Group, African Rising for Justice, Peace and Dignity.